Welcome back. It's exactly 10 a.m. Welcome back, everyone. So, now the second part of this training, we're going to learn about what it means, what organizational learning is all about. So, what is organizational learning? Organizational learning is a process of creating, retaining, and transferring knowledge within an organization. So, um, an organization, it says here, it improves over time as it gains experience, as it gains knowledge, as it does what it does, right? It, it improves with the experience it gets from the members of the workforce. So from that experience, all those experience within the workforce, now it's able to create those knowledge. Now, knowledge is created at four different units. Pay attention. Knowledge is created at four different units. Number one is by individuals. Knowledge is created by individuals, person to person. So as you go to school, as you take your mandatory training, you get yourself educated, you read, you watch YouTube, you listen to a podcast, um, you read books, you go on social media, you're getting knowledge as an individual. Now, knowledge is also created as a group. There's something they call groupthink, right? Everyone is thinking alike, right? So you can gain knowledge as a group. Now, also the third one is as an organization. So four units that I'm going to mention, one as an individual, the other one as a group, then the third one as an organization, and then the last one is as inter-organizational. Organization can learn from another organization. So organization to organization, all right, can learn, can get things between each other, right? Now, the reason why I talked about organizational learning is because of the role of knowledge management, right? As a knowledge manager or within knowledge management, there's what they call organizational learning, which we talked about earlier, which is the process of creating, retaining, and transferring knowledge. Now, for the role of a knowledge manager, there are certain job uh, um, announcement, job vacancy that they will um, uh, display. And that job, they're looking for a chief learning officer, or a learning officer. I don't want you to shy away from jobs like that. Okay. So that's why what we just learned now is important. So if there's a job for a chief learning officer, you can go ahead and apply for that because it's all about knowledge management. Basically, what you will be doing as a chief learning officer is basically creating, retaining, and transferring knowledge within organization with all the knowledge management framework, all the knowledge management concept that we learned. That's how you do it. You're doing knowledge management, but the role is called the chief learning officer. It's all the same thing. So that's why what we just learned now is important. And I brought it as a slide, is so that when you see a job, you're not looking for only um, knowledge management specialist or knowledge officer or whatever. When you see things about chief learning officer, or even a librarian, right? They are all related because all they do is to capture knowledge, store knowledge, and disseminate knowledge, right? So the knowledge management as a practice is very robust, is very vast. So there are several jobs, and when after the exams, when you pass your exam, and we're looking at your resume, and then we start searching for jobs. There are several jobs that you can apply that is related to knowledge management. But I don't want you guys to shy away from those jobs. There are, in fact, within the knowledge management practice, there's thousands of jobs, but you might not know. That's what where we come in. We are going to guide you in looking for those jobs. That you probably think, oh, this is not a knowledge management job. No, my duty is to help you say, okay, this particular one is a knowledge management job. Some jobs they will throw, even some IT job, they will say, hey, they want you to know a little bit of knowledge management. And when you see stuff like that, you know that, oh, this might be a knowledge management organization. All right. So uh, I think last week I started talking about knowledge management, the importance of knowledge management as a career, and also talked about the need for organizations to have knowledge management. Right? We talked about it. So, like I said earlier, what we are doing today is to foot stomp on the things we learned last week. Now we're going to dive into why is there surge in organizations' interest in knowledge management? Why all of a sudden organizations are interested in knowledge management? Why do we have that, trend recently? If you Google, like I shared with us last week, LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn is, I don't know about Indeed. LinkedIn is, I kind of trust them a little bit because, it's more professional. You don't get a lot of um, AI bots announcing jobs, or you get real job announcement from LinkedIn. That's where I go, right? So they've kind of honed in on catering to professionals, right? So why do you think there's now interest in knowledge management? Can anybody share with us why they think there's interest in knowledge management? From what we learned, you know, last week, why do you think there's, from your own understanding of knowledge management, from what we talked about last week, can anybody, just one person, one or two people, can you just, share with us why you think there's this interest in knowledge management? Can anybody say? All right. So hearing none, well, let's go through what we have here on the bullet. Number one, I have here, I say the shift to a knowledge-based economy. So this is very foundational. This is a foundational reason, because for most modern companies, uh, intellectual capital or your knowledge base as an organization are supposed to be seen as an asset. You hear, companies stealing other people's intellectual capital. For instance, I think I gave an example last week where you see a company, all this medicine that you see they produce. I'm not talking as a, I'm not talking as a medical professional, as a health professional. I'm just talking as a lay person that has a common knowledge about, and also I'm talking as a researcher, right? There's a lot that goes into when you're producing a medicine. For instance, when you're producing for a pharmaceutical company to produce a medicine, there's something called research and development. And anyone here that is within IT, I know Mr. Victor here is IT. I think Toby is also IT person. Any person that does IT should have an idea of what research and development is, at least development, system development, but before that, there's a lot of money. When you're talking about healthcare, there's a lot of money that goes into the research and development. So when you have those money invested, sometimes I hear is billions of dollars. They invest in a medicine and you produce that medicine. Can you imagine when you produce a medicine? Now that medicine is possibly, if you don't have insurance, that medicine can cost you maybe $200 to get that medicine, maybe to get a dose of it. Let's say it costs you $200. But because someone stole it, because someone stole your intellectual capital or intellectual property, right? They are able to get the formula that you use to produce that medicine. Can anyone tell me what the person that stole, why do you think that person might sell that medicine that is $200? The person might sell it for $20. Can anybody just help the class out, please? Just, it's a simple analogy that I made. It's going to help you kind of understand why, there's a shift to a knowledge-based economy. Can anybody say, whatever? No answer is a wrong answer. Can
This one
anybody
big
tell me? So this is what the analogy I gave you. A company spent 200 million or billion dollars, or let's say million, billion is kind of $200 million to produce a medicine, and they are selling it for $200 per dose, right? Another company now steals their model, all their, design and whatever, steals it, and now is selling that same medicine for $20. Can someone tell me why that person is able to sell it for $20 and then the other company is selling it for $200? Can someone, okay, I think there's someone that put something on the chat. Okay, let's see. Yes, Dovi said they never worked for it and they don't know the value. Okay, I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll take that. Any other person? Any other person? Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Dovis. Can any other person tell us why do you think? So this other company spent 200. So the other company that stole from them did not spend that much money. So the first company that spent 200 million would want to recover the money they invested in the research and development. That is why, intellectual capital is always valuable and is good to be protected. So in our subsequent lesson, in our subsequent training, we are going to learn, some of the securities, how you can protect intellectual. In fact, I want to foot stomp on this. You as a knowledge management person should know that what you have in your mind, that your tacit knowledge that we talked about last week, is your own personal intellectual capital. And you should know that it's a very valuable asset to you. And that is why I think, if time permits, we're going to learn knowledge hoarding, right? How people hoard knowledge, because knowledge is power. So if you're able to hoard knowledge, I am against people that hoard knowledge. Right? I'm against. It's not good to hoard knowledge. It's good to share. So that's your duty as a knowledge manager or a knowledge management practitioner, is to, as KM practitioner, you advocate for knowledge sharing. That's your biggest job, is to make sure that people are able to share knowledge. And we're going to, talk about incentives and, for people that share knowledge, right? So it's shifting. The economy is now shifting to a knowledge-based economy where your intellectual capital becomes a currency. What you have in your mind, that thing you have in your brain, is now a capital for you, because, peradventure, you are the only one that know that thing. You become an asset to the organization. You become an asset. That's why we are going to learn in the course of this training how you can protect those assets and how you can also be valuable. Not only that you are, how you can become relevant in an organization and become valuable, because it's important when they are cutting people, when they are. I shared with you last time, because of the job I do. During this government shutdown, I'm brought back to the job. Why? Because of the kind of role I play, right? Now I'm valuable. That's why, in my opinion, I believe they called me back to continue working, because, yeah, we need you to do what you do. All right. So number one is the shift to a knowledge-based economy. Most organizations are shifting because they know that knowledge-based assets are more valuable than physical or capital asset. I mean, we don't need to argue that in this class, but knowledge assets are very valuable because you see a typical um, uh, uh, um, a corporation buys, a lot of businesses buy each other, right? Someone develops an app. Let me tell you, if you develop an app or develop a business model and the, organization buys it, you that is the developer, they might pay you money, to buy that thing, to have control of that. Then guess what? Guess what? They will retain you that developed it. Why? Because you know why they might sack every other person, but they will keep you because they know that I think all those in that are in IT will kind of resonate with what I'm trying to say, right? You are the person that developed that app. You are the person that developed that model. I need you to be able to sustain that model for sustenance, for future sustenance, for future, at least I need that your intellectual capital. So I might fire every other person and buy this thing, but I'll be paying you. And sometimes they negotiate and say, you know what, let me make you the CEO. Right? Let me make you the CEO of this organization. See when Meta bought over WhatsApp. They retained some of the key engineers. They retained some of them. When Elon bought over Twitter, they retained some key engineers. They retained some people. There are some people, although they got rid of other people later on, but there are certain people that they had to retain them, at least for transition. For a smooth transition, you have to retain certain people. Otherwise, the whole thing is going to shut down because these people have the intellectual capital. They have the intellectual assets. All right. So if you fire them, then there's going to be, disadvantage. All right. So it also helps you with competitive advantage, gain competitive advantage, right? Because if you have the intellectual capital, some of the code, some of the how this software was designed. You are familiar with some of the customers. You know how what they need. You kind of you have the expertise, right? If you have those things, those are the things that they need in the organization. Imagine if you are someone that developed an app. There's a reason you were trying to solve a problem. There's a reason you developed that app. And you have done all the research. You interacted with all those end users and you kind of garnered their needs. And then you were able to solve a problem for them. When someone buys over the company, they will want to retain you because you are the one that knows the source of the problem, right? Okay, so the next point is the rise of remote and hybrid work. So not so much about remote because not so much about remote work right now because of the current dispensation, but there's a lot of COVID came and left an indelible mark in the way people do business, and forever the way people do business will change. It has changed, right? The pandemic really it was not planned, but it really left an indelible mark. But now people are now transitioning. It used to be full remote, but now people are transitioning to hybrid work. So they work half remote and also they come into the office. So that is going to remain. Hybrid work is going to remain. And a lot of knowledge management people, they will be doing hybrid work. So maybe they might ask you, oh, we need you to come in once in a while into the office, just so that they know, that at least you are alive, or, at least who your team members are. So that rise in remote work hybrid work, is part of the reason why now organization is interested. Now you know that what somebody knows. Imagine if someone is in charge of a particular project, and that person is kind of has all their tentacles in every aspect of that project, and you let that person go. Guess what? Unless you start a different project, if you start a particular project, it's going to fail because the person that is possibly at the single point of failure, the person that is a single point of failure has been let go. It becomes a disaster for that organization. Okay, so it, how we used to do things before, where everyone is in the office. You have conversations, you have, when you come to office, you relate with people, you interact with them, you gather knowledge, you communicate with them. Those things, when someone is there physical, is different from when someone is not there. So the rise in hybrid work, not so much about remote, you know, made people interested in organization interested in in the KM as a program. Now, the other one is the great resignation and the loss of institutional knowledge, right? No organization wants to lose the institutional knowledge. So, for instance, what is an institutional knowledge? Like, right? Someone that has been in a job for 10 to 20 years, that person has an institutional knowledge. So, no organization that a well-meaning or organization that wants to profit, no organization that wants to profit would want to lose such a person. At most, at most, you will get someone to do a knowledge audit on them, and do an exit interview, and then capture some of the things that they know. But there's no way that they will be able to regurgitate everything they've learned for the 10 to 20 years they've been in the institution, in the organization. There's no way they can spew that in a 30 minutes sitting with you. There's no way. All right. So it's important to make sure that you do not lose those institutional knowledge. But at most, you will, find a way to capture those knowledge. So that's why people are now implementing knowledge management program, because they don't want to lose, the knowledge resources they have. All right. And these are knowledge that have been accumulated for years. All right. These are knowledge that have been accumulated for years. We have a situation where one of the when we decided to my organization, we decided to now develop what they call a continuity book. It's called continuity book. We developed that book because um, there was a time an individual was like a single point of failure, and this person one day decided to quit the job. And when they quit the job, nobody knew where anything was. This person quit and nobody knew where anything was. So, what did they do? These are, for that particular agency that I worked for, it cost a lot of money for that particular project that this individual was running. And what happened was basically they had to shut the whole thing down. They shut the whole thing down because there was a single point of failure. But guess what? There was that singular problem now caused them to develop a knowledge management program where now they developed a part of this problem was solution was now to develop a continuity book. What is a continuity book? A continuity book is basically, documenting how individuals do their job. and they can do a knowledge audit maybe every 3 months or every 6 months, but there's always going to be a book where they document all the processes. Tell me, I meet knowledge worker A. I say, please give me a life in your day as a IT specialist. So you tell me when you get into work, this is what I do. I check my email, I will document it. I go and check all my my schedule to see what are my tasks for today. And then these are the people I call. I'll document all your point of contacts. I will make sure that it's up to date. You tell me the processes, how you do. The reason is because if you leave that job tomorrow, I, as the manager, will not have to suffer, loss by maybe, starting a brand new project, and everything that you've worked for your short time in that agency now becomes a waste. No, we won't do that. But what we'll do is capture everything that you do so that now when you leave the job, someone else knows exactly, and everything you document must be verified. So there should be a way for you to now say, okay, all these processes that this individual documented, let me verify if it actually worked, right? Now, the next one is about, the overwhelming, I call it information obesity, right? Information glut, right? It's like, or information glut. It's like a place where, people, dump information, right? There's too much information, too much, it's like organization is drowning in data, like too much data, but they can't use that data to be actionable, to do anything. Like, it's a dumping ground. It's like, oh, you store things, you dump things everywhere. But employees are kind of bombarded with all kinds of information. Nothing is streamlined. Nothing is, everything is dumped in one place. Now, the issue with that is it's very difficult to find the right, or authoritative data for you to make any meaningful decision with. When you find a place where everything is dumped there, for instance, I can give you a typical example. In my agency, we have a shared drive. We also have a cloud storage, right? It's like on that your company shared drive, you dump all kinds of information. There's no file plan. You just dump everything there. People are overwhelmed with that, and sometimes people don't go there because they just feel it's overwhelming. I can't find anything when I need it, right? So there's no way you can trust all the data that is in there, because sometimes it's not even um, updated. So it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Like, you're trying to find something, you can't find it because it's all over the place. So that is what I mean by, you know, information glut or information obesity, where everything is so dumped in that particular place. But the good news is that a knowledge manager, or when you have a knowledge management program, all those things is now claimed. All those things, it will now be outlined in such a way that people are able to search it. People are able, part of it is changing people mindset on how they store information. You create a process, you put a process in place, and also you can now finally add a tool to make those things very searchable. Now, the other one is the acceleration of pace and the need for agility. Now, the business cycle is faster than ever now compared to what we used to do before. So that means that companies must innovate, they must be very adaptive, and also if they want to survive, they have to learn rapidly in order to survive. So that means that a robust or a very dynamic knowledge management system will have to be in place, right? And this will allow them to do things like make, put projects in place, put systems in place, put things in place in order to be able to compete, and this will also help them to, if there's any mistake they've made in the past, they will be able to correct it. They'll be able to, to fix it. The next one I want to talk is the maturation of enabling technology. I've talked about AI last week. I've talked about it today. You know, Things have changed, and one of these lesson we are going to learn about AI and how AI helps benefit knowledge management. So AI have come to stay, and you know, um, it's important for people to understand, the ethical use of it and how it's going to help you with, knowledge management. So, um, with KM, AI is also very, very important and is very, very well needed. And also, typically, we used to put things in a shared drive. Now, most agencies are putting their stuff in a cloud. Your storage is in a cloud. Some of the systems are, in a cloud. That the regular server that people used to have in their homes, in their home office or in their offices, or putting things in a shared drive. People no longer do that. Maybe they put a few things in a shared drive, but the rest of the information is stored in a cloud. In fact, I think recently, uh, um, was it maybe, let's say, 2 years ago, some agencies within the government changed from the way SharePoint used to be. SharePoint that they have now is in a cloud. I think it's the SharePoint 19 or so is now in a cloud, and it's a bit a flat line. It's not like the regular SharePoint that people used to see. That's because the way information is stored now is different with the SharePoint. Now, organizations they have to change their strategy, uh, in the sense that what the type of information you put on SharePoint now is minimalized to a final product. What does that mean? That means that, aside from being a collaborative tool, now when you want to display information, you want to make sure that that data that you used to that particular document that you used to collaborate, you won't put it on SharePoint. You might dump it in the shared drive, but the final product is what is now shown on on your SharePoint. Now, SharePoint doesn't now become your storage or your repository. It just becomes a place where you display information. So that is, and the last one is this: the need for innovation. That is a self-explanatory, right? People want to innovate. Innovative companies are very competitive. They have, strategic advantage, they have competitive advantage. So you want to make sure that you keep to pace. The reason why today, um, Nokia phone, the reason why Nokia phone failed is because they did not follow the trend of innovation. Nokia used to be, one of the, big vendors when it comes to cell phone, and also BlackBerry. But the reason is because people they did not, follow the trend of innovation. When you not innovate, when you are following the trend of or try to, change the way you do things to meet the present dispensation, I think you will have an advantage, a competitive advantage, right? So because of the need for companies to innovate, um, uh, uh, they will have to come up with a knowledge management strategy. all right, or a knowledge management program. Now, we are going to distinguish between data, knowledge, and information. Data, knowledge, and information. These are two different things. These are two different things. And we are going to learn that data is different from knowledge, and knowledge is different from information. So, like the slide says, data is not information. Data is not information. Data is the most basic element of raw, unrecognized, and unprocessed facts and figures. The raw, the most basic. Data is discrete. Data is an objective fact about something that has happened. It doesn't have a context, there's no action to it, and there's no performance. And this is going to make sense when we get to the point where we are describing what knowledge is all about. So pay attention. So when it comes to data, data is not an information. This is like a raw, unrecognized, unprocessed fact. Data is fact that is not, processed. It's not organized. It's not, it's raw. It could be a figure. It could be a fact about something. It has no meaning or context on its own. So if you put a data inside something, there's no meaning to it. There's no meaning to that thing that you put there. For instance, let me give you an instance. If I say A and I put C and I put T, and I say SA. So A is a letter on its own. And I say C on its own, T on its own, T on its own, and I say A or S on its own. It doesn't mean anything, right? It's just an objective or a characteristics on its own. Now, imagine if I now, say, okay, now let me put this thing, or let me start again. What if I tell you now and I say, I call out a number and I say 38.5, or I say, okay, 155, 182, 144, or I say, uh, Jesus Christ, for instance, or I say Jesse Jackson, for instance. I just said Jesse Jackson. It doesn't mean anything. You can say, oh, Jesse Jackson is a name. Yeah, and that's just a data. Or I can say 10 a.m. I just say 10 a.m. in a vacuum. But guess what? If I say, let's say I say at 38, if I say 38.5 is a temperature, it puts meaning to it, right? 38.5. And I say, okay, I connect it with a temperature. Now it's beginning to make meaning. But putting it as 38 doesn't mean anything. It's just a number. It could be anything. So 38.5 could be anything. It could be, it could be temperature, it could be outside temperature, it could not be outside temperature, it could be maybe a particular boiling point where something is, say, okay, something boils at this point, right? At 38 point something. It can be, but when I say 38.5, it's just a number. So that is what data is all about. I don't want to go too technical, but I want you to understand the difference between data and information. So that is what data is all about. Data is basically just, a characteristics of something, a raw fact that, when you throw it alone, it has no context to it. So a data doesn't tell a story. It doesn't tell you a story. All right. It can be put in a database or a knowledge base, but it doesn't mean anything. Right? For instance, I gave you an example of a a single temperature reading or something like a number or somebody's name, a politician's name, Jesse Jackson, right? I threw it there. It's just a data. It doesn't mean anything. We don't know what that means. If I say Jesse Jackson, you know, unless you know he's a politician, it could be any other Jesse Jackson. It might not just be the politician, right? Or human rights activist. I might just say, oh, John Doe. John Doe doesn't mean anything. Who is John Doe? You know? So there's number. I'm stressing this because I want you to understand what data is all about. It's the raw fact that doesn't tell a story. A data does not tell you a story. It does not mean anything. It can, you can store it in any database. You can just put it there, but it doesn't tell you it can just be a measurement of something. It doesn't tell you a full story. Now, what is information? So we've talked about info, but we're going to bring all these things together so that you now know what knowledge is, what we're talking about. So I'm hoping that by the time we talk about I finish describing this thing, you will understand what data is all about. I don't want to rush this class if you don't understand what I'm talking about. So from today, even if maybe you've done, you've been a professional for 20 years, my duty today is to explain to you what data is all about, because oftentimes people confuse data with information and also with knowledge. These are three different things, so we've established now that data doesn't tell a story. So when somebody asks you, what is a data? You can say, well, data doesn't tell a story. Data, can be anything. There's no way to say what that, what it means. It can be an individual letter, like I said, A, B, C, D, or A, C, T, T, S, A. Like I said, it doesn't mean anything. It can be just saying 10:45 a.m. Yeah, 10:45 a.m. Yeah, what is 10:45 a.m.? What about it? What about 10:45 a.m.? I can say John Doe. What about John Doe? 35.8 or 38.5. What does that mean? I can call out a number. What does that mean? All right. So that's data. Now that I know that you know what data is, what is information? Information now becomes a data with context and purpose. Data that information has relevance and purpose. It's a data that makes a difference. It's contextualized. You put context to it. You can categorize it. You can analyze it. You can correct it. You can condense it. All right. So data, information now is a data that has a context to it and it has a purpose. So it's now, you get to a point where now those data are now processed. They are now organized. They are now structured. And now they are presented in a way that it makes, it makes it meaningful, and it's also useful for you to make decision with it. So it answers a basic question of who, what, when, where. So information is answering those questions: who, what, when, where. So information now becomes that data that has a context to it. It has a purpose to it. Now, remember that letter that I called earlier, that I said A, C, T, T, S, A, right? Now, see how that letter becomes an information. So I called earlier, I said, oh, A, C, T, T, S, A, just simple letter. Now, this is how that letter becomes an information. That data becomes an information. C, I can take those letters and now make it make sense. I can pull C from there and take A from there, and now T, it becomes a cat. right? Now, CAT becomes an information. Now I can say, okay, from see that letter that I pointed out, I can now use it and say SAT. I can pull SAT from that letter, and it becomes something SAT, right? You know, this is important because I can now say, okay, I saw a raw data that doesn't make any sense. But now that raw data now is now, I take some numbers from there, some letters from there to now make it a cat. Oh, wow. Now I know what this is. So now it's making a difference. Now I'm contextualizing it by now saying, oh, those raw data are now cat. So by now, what am I doing? I'm connecting it, and also I'm contextualizing it, right? For instance, I can say the average temperature. Remember when I said 38.5, right? I can say the average temperature this week was 38.5 degrees centigrade. You see, now I've taken that raw data and I've put it, I've contextualized it, and I've connected it to now make sense, to now be able to tell us what an average temperature is. So when I threw out the number 38.5, it didn't mean anything. But now, because I've been able to now, use it to calculate something, to share something, it makes a lot of sense. For instance, I can say, if I say 15%, 15% is 15%. It doesn't mean anything. 15% of what? But I can say sales in quarter 1 of this year were up by 15%. You see, now it makes sense. So that raw data now becomes an information. And you can use that if sales was 15%. Your target probably next week is to make that sales to 20%. So now you're making sense out of it, right? You're making sense out of it. Now, remember when I called a number 155, 182, 144? How does it become information? I can say, well, the sales for last week was $155. When I said 155, it didn't make anything. But because I tied it, I connected with something, it now makes a sense. So information has relevance and purpose. You can actually use it to make decision. It makes meaning. It brings meaning to what you're trying to talk about. The temperature, you can now use it to say, oh, the temperature of this person that was sick, was this amount. That is how it's connected. So data, we talked about information, and now let's talk about who we are, knowledge managers. So what is knowledge? So knowledge is derived from people, as the slide says. It can show comparisons, it can show consequences, connections, conversation. So knowledge lives in action and performance. That's what we have on the slide here. So let's bring it all together, right? Remember when I threw out those numbers? I threw out, figures, numbers, yeah. I threw out letters, that didn't make sense. But now I was able to now pull that letter, to make it an information. I was like, okay, those letters that I had, let's say, is a cat and one is a sat, right? Now, in order for this to make sense, for me to use it, I have to be able to, synthesize it. So knowledge is an information that is synthesized. Knowledge is an information that is synthesized. It shows, experience. It shows context. It can interpret, and also it can reflect something. And As a knowledge manager, you have to know something. It Knowledge is always actionable. You see where I says knowledge lives in action and performance. It is always actionable, right? It's actionable for the an information that is actionable. You can use it to do something. It answers the question of how and why, and it can allow you to make decision, to be able to predict something, right? It helps you to be able to say, okay, putting all these things together as an information, the raw data, you put it together, it becomes an information. And now, in order for it to become a knowledge, people need to be able to use it to make decision. For example, I can say at 35, 38 point, a fever of 38.5 degrees centigrade in an adult combined, you know, with a cough and body aches is typically indicative of what? Let's say cold, or you can say, you know, um, cold, or you can say, okay, maybe COVID or something like that. So now you're able to put those information, the information, you're able to put it together, you synthesize it, and it now makes it makes meaning, and you can use that information to be able to, if you have those things as a medical doctor, you can say, okay, we can use it to cure this disease. Maybe this is what is actually going on with this person. Or even if it's a sales data that you're talking about, right? If it's a sales data that you're talking about, you say, okay, 15% of something, of sales for last week, is indicative of that they didn't meet their mark. Maybe they had, the objective was to meet 20%, but they made 15%. Now, you can say, oh, well, 15% of these sales means that we did not meet our sales objective. So now you're making meaning out of the stuff that you're talking about, right? Any question? Any question at all? All right. So it's exactly 10:52. It's 10:52. All right. So take a break and come back at 11. Come back at 11. Unless you have any question. If you don't have any question, take a break. Take a break, stretch your leg, and come back at 11. Then we'll continue with the next